of things that are not in my bio. On this slide, you see two little babies sitting on a couch. The smaller baby is my younger sister. She was born in 1968. She was a preterm baby, weighing less than a pound. She was born a couple of years after President Kennedy lost his son to prematurity. And the death of President Kennedy's son is what really spurred the development of neonatal intensive care in the United States of America. When my sister was born, she did not have a name for 30 days. My parents just called her baby girl Major. They were told that she was not going to survive. She is the reason why I wanted to be a premature baby doctor. The picture below is my husband and I renewing our wedding vows. Our last trip before COVID in 2019, that was our 25th wedding anniversary. We've been together 30 years, married 28. Terri AM. So he will tell you the same. The picture adjacent to that is me doing what I love, taking care of babies in the NICU. And that's the picture a dad took the day the baby was admitted to the NICU. I was intubating. I didn't know he had taken the picture. He gave it to me 8 months later when the baby was discharged. He did not think his son was going to survive. And he gave me that picture as a gift. Above that, you see a ferret kissing a young woman on the cheek. That's my daughter, and that's her emotional support ferret, Nemo, and that's a talk for another day. My daughter is a senior in vet school at Tuskegee, and above that's my sweet baby boy. He's still my baby, but he's 22. He has a full beard and dreadlocks to his waist, and he would not look like a baby to you, but he still looks like a baby to me. Adjacent to that is my favorite family picture. I'm constantly reminded of how fast time goes, and that we really want to focus on the things that are most important for us and the things that are most important for our families. Lauren mentioned that I went to Prairie View, an HBCU, and I went to UCLA for medical school. She mentioned I had a couple of books. She mentioned I'm from Louisiana. I cannot cook. I don't eat gumbo. I don't eat crawfish. I'm an embarrassment to the state. Everything else. And the picture I just want to draw your attention to is the picture in the middle that says Soul Train, because that's my claim to fame. My husband's first job after high school was dancing on Soul Train. You guys were old enough to remember Soul Train. Well, tell me something cool about you. Like my husband danced on Soul Train. My husband danced on Soul Train. Y'all remember anything else? My husband danced on Soul Train. So we have a couple of objectives this morning. Okay, so we're going to go over the trends in perinatal health disparities. We're going to describe the relationship between systemic health disparities and implicit bias. We're going to talk about some policy approaches from the national level to advance maternal health outcomes. We're going to talk about some local evidence-based strategies. And as what has been mentioned already today, we're going to talk about some sensitive topics. So I always like to just have a grounding space that we're all here just to learn how to do our jobs better. And I want you guys to know I honor and recognize that you're bringing your full self to this experience, and I am bringing my full self to this experience as well. And I'm grateful that we're all here in the room together. So I know that the Ohio AP has done a number of interventions already around DEI. I was actually telling Alex and Liz that I try to do all y'all's learning modules and stuff because you guys have such cool and progressive training going on. So, but if you have not participated in those, I would just challenge everybody in the room, if you've done the implicit bias association test already, to go back and do it for something other than race. Do it for weight, do it for gender, do it for religion, do it for body size. We all have biases, and the biases are there. It's part of your lived experience. If you grew, wherever you grew up, you have biases that are part of your lived experience. And you want to be aware of your biases because they impact your decision, both explicitly and implicitly. So quickly, I would just like you guys to take a second just to see if you can read this paragraph. This paragraph is a challenge to you about cognitive bias and how rapidly our brain is able to put together words, pictures, sounds, images, just based on our lived experience. Every word in this paragraph is spelled incorrectly. And most people, I have dyslexia, and I was able to, oh, I'm sorry, I can't even see it, huh? Oh, maybe I should have it. Sorry. So go ahead and try to read this paragraph and let me know what you guys think about that. I mean, if you guys were able to read it pretty easily. Yeah, so it's just a reminder that our brain is so amazing that it constantly is putting together patterns of things we've seen, sending messages back to us that we can act upon. So this is just a summary of everything we talked about already: intersectionality, the multiple aspects of our identity. We bring all of that, our whole person, to every experience, and so do our patients. One of the things I didn't point out on the first slide is that my son and I both have dyslexia. And because we both have dyslexia, we navigate the world a bit differently. And there are some things that are challenging for us that are not challenging for others. And the reason I mention that is because I want to point to privilege. In this climate, the word privilege has become very triggering. But all privilege means is that there's something about an aspect of your identity that has allowed you to have an advantage that someone else who doesn't have that aspect of their identity has. So for example, if you're somebody who has a disability or some challenges with mobility, there are some advantages that others have that you don't have when you're navigating the world. And so when we say privilege, it doesn't necessarily always mean race privilege. It means privilege in several aspects of our identity. I also use the example of having grown up in the South. I'm from Louisiana. My grandfather was a Baptist preacher. He had 3 churches. One of the national boards I'm on, where I lead DEI efforts, we have a large pregnancy loss conference. And one of the complaints about the conference was the vendor area is too Christ-centric. And I said, it is? So then I went to the vendor area and I realized that for me, because that was a part of my identity, it didn't seem Christ-centric to me. But it seemed very Christ-centric to people who that was not part of their faith base. And it allowed us to reevaluate the way we have vendors at that conference and the way we elevate and recognize everyone. The definition I like to use for racism is Dr. Kamara Jones' definition. She used to be the former president of the American Public Health Association, and she's done a lot of work around racism and allegory and teaching. And the definition that she uses, a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on the social interpretation of one's looks, what we call race. It unfairly disadvantages some and advantages others, and saps whole communities of the strength of the whole society. So simply, a system where we advantage one group and we disadvantage another group simply by what our brain is assigning is what we see. So how did I come to this work? So I told you I wanted to be a neonatologist because my sister was a preemie. I like to say she's the first preemie I ever took care of. My sister was 4'9". I always tell her, if it had TPN then, I think you'd be a little more. Whenever she's driving, I'm always like, you know, you're not supposed to be in the front seat, right? That's a story for another day. So in that, on this slide, on the middle picture, you see me and my lab partners, our first day of anatomy lab, outside of the anatomy lab. We were so excited to be in medical school and so excited to be our first cadaver. And so excited about science and people who had donated their bodies to science. We named our cadaver Freddie Copernicus Kruger. I still remember his name. And we enjoyed that experience very much. Between my 3rd and 4th year of medical school, we had our public health class, and I picked the topic infant mortality. And I came across a book in the library that was entitled Capital Crime, Black Infant Mortality in America. And I was horrified that someone had named that book Capital Crime, because my understanding of capital crime as murder, I couldn't understand why that was the title of this book. And within this book, they mentioned boroughs in New York that had infant mortality rates that were higher than some third world countries. Also in this book, they pointed out that a Black woman with a college degree was 2 times more likely to have an adverse birth outcome than a white woman with a GED. And I was horrified, because at that point I was working on my 3rd degree. I'm like, this other gonna go down. Y'all are saying this, and I'm like, what in the heck? So I delayed graduation from medical school between my 3rd and 4th year to get my master's in public health. thinking, well, we need to get this situation settled before I have my own family. But here we are, 20-some years later, still having the same conversation. And I hope you receive from that that these problems that we're talking about in terms of disparities are not new. It's on everybody's radar, but we have had these problems for a long, long time. This is the original paper that compared college-educated Black women to white women. There's been several papers since then. The other thing I learned during that time in medical school was or shortly after medical school, all the interventions that have happened from the 90s to more recently with respect to trying to figure out why we have these disparities. And most of the interventions were targeted at blaming Black women for these adverse outcomes. It's because you're overweight. It's because you have high blood pressure. It's because you're single. It's because you need to get prenatal care. It's because you don't have access. And that every intervention was targeted toward fixing something that was wrong with Black women. The biggest interventions were targeted at is because you're Black. It's because you're Black. There's something about having melanin that has increased your risk for having adverse outcomes. And so Dr. Collins and Dr. David really looked at this for the first time, presuming that if we believe that melanin is the reason that Black women have adverse outcomes, that if we compare US-born Blacks to African-born Blacks, then we would expect women that are African-born to have higher rates than women who are US-born Blacks, because presumably the melanin is higher. And in this study, they were able to show that African-born Blacks and US whites, the first year, those children are the same. There's not an increased risk for low birth weight. So those two curves that are approximating each other, that's African born and US born. And then you can African born and US white compared to US born Blacks. And so it's not being Black that increases your risk for poor outcomes. It's being Black in America. It's being Black in America. It's being Black in America. It's something about the lived experience. And after being in the United States just one generation, the outcomes get worse for African-born Blacks. So, and that is true for a lot of immigrant populations, one generation here in the United States. This study has been repeated twice since then, most recently by California, looking at the same thing, looking at immigrants to the United States and US-born Blacks. So I want to just drill home that we know that it is not race that is the biggest predictor of adverse outcomes. So what are disparities? The definition I like to use for disparities also came from Kamara Jones. And disparities are persistent, avoidable, and therefore unfair health differences between socially advantaged and disadvantaged groups. To me, the word that sticks out the most here is avoidable. Disparities are differences that should not be. So we're going to look quickly at some trends and a variety of perinatal health disparities. We're going to drill down on some of the causes of those, and then we're going to have a conversation about some potential solutions and strategies. So I know everybody in the room is familiar with these numbers, so I'm going to just give a quick overview. I just wanted to have a total summary of the types of disparities we see in the perinatal health period. So the United States is considered to be the most dangerous country in the developed world to give birth. 2 women will die from pregnancy-related causes today and every day. 2 babies die every hour in the United States. Pregnancy-related deaths have more than doubled in the past 25 years, and 5 million women live in maternity care deserts. That's a county for which there's no maternal care for over 100 miles. That's in the United States. That's in the United States. We know that in this country, Black women have maternal death rates that are 3 to 4 times the rates of other women. And we also know that babies that are born to women of color can face 130% higher infant death rate. Y'all tell me if y'all slides are moving with mine. Sorry, I usually have it together synchronized. So this is causing my dyslexia to go, oh, girl, what's up? So maternal mortality. So the definition that we use for maternal mortality is the death of a woman while pregnant or within 42 days of termination of pregnancy, irrespective of the duration or the site of the pregnancy, any cause that's not considered accidental or traumatic. And I want to draw your picture to this graph. Many people are aware of the increased rates for maternal mortality for Black women in the United States. I just want to emphasize that the majority of these deaths are not happening in the delivery room. Many times when people hear maternal mortality, they're thinking women are dying at the time of delivery. And I want you to pay attention to the fact that the majority of these deaths are happening within the first 6 weeks after delivery. And most women don't get their first postpartum visit till the 6-week visit. So you may be dead before you actually get your postpartum visit. And the causes of death are largely related to cardiovascular causes that get worse after pregnancy. Not that women weren't seeking help. We have numerous stories of women that were seeking help. My feet are swollen. I'm having short of breath. I'm still having headaches. Should I be going home with a blood pressure of 150 over 100? Who was still discharged with numbers like that in hospitals in the United States, and they died as a result of that. We know that with Serena, she was in the hospital with shortness of breath. She had DVTs in her calves. She had a history already of DVTs. She was aware of the symptoms of pulmonary embolism. She had to fight and go over her healthcare team to get that assessed. So we know that SCS status, access to insurance, and having access to the best healthcare team does not always prevent that. This is just a comparison of the United States against other developed countries. People are always surprised. So we're the richest country, we have the most doctors, we have the best technology, and we have the worst outcomes compared to other developed countries. The safest place to deliver actually today goes back and forth between New Zealand, Denmark, and Finland. What is it that they're doing that we're not doing? This is just another way to look at the disparities, and again showing how much the United States is an outlier compared to other developed countries. So we talked a little bit about increased maternal mortality rates. Some of the things women of color report with respect to disparate treatment or being actually shouted at or scolded in the hospital during their labor experience, refusing requests for help, having invasion of their privacy, or actually being told that treatment was going to be withheld if they did not comply with the recommendations of the medical team. The next area I want to look at is postpartum depression. So we know that African American women are more than twice as likely to experience postpartum depressive symptoms as White women. And we know that the risk for Hispanic women is almost twice as high. We know that Black women are less likely to receive treatment for their postpartum depression, even if it's diagnosed. And we know about 1 in 5 women are not even asked about symptoms of depression during the prenatal visit, and 1 in 8 are not asked during the postpartum visit. 50% of women who have depression during pregnancy will go untreated. The reason we know that depression screening matters, and Chris was talking about this yesterday about the importance of just addressing mental health in our pediatric populations, and why we are starting to look more to our pediatricians to help capture women who actually never make their postpartum visit, but the child actually is brought in for the 2-week visit for the pediatrician. We know that the cost of longitudinal care are increased when depression isn't treated. We know that mother or partners who have disrupted bonding with the infant will have discontinuation of breastfeeding. We know that it increases family dysfunction. We know there's an increased risk for abuse and neglect. And we know that the long-term impact on the infant of this disrupted bond impacts their developmental issues long beyond the infancy period. And with respect to our pediatricians, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this study. This was a really nice study looking at incentivizing pediatricians for the screening for postpartum depression, capturing how much of the depression that we miss in our Medicare, in a population that was on Medicare. So one of the things they were able to show is that 1 in 7 Medicaid beneficiaries experience depression after delivery, that only 10% of mothers receive treatment for depression, that 3 in 4 mother-infant pairs had more visits with their pediatricians and their adult providers. And 2 and 5 actually never saw an adult provider again after they had their baby. So you guys really are the catchment. We are the catchment to kind of close this gap and make sure that mothers of color are getting appropriate screening for postpartum depression. There are a lot of barriers for why, even if we are screening, we still don't capture it, and I'll talk about that a little later. So finally, I want to talk a little bit in terms of disparities about preterm birth. We've already talked about Black babies are the biggest predictor of death for Black infant mortality is preterm birth. For white infants, it's genetic disorders, but for Black infants, it's preterm birth. This was a very popular systematic review that was done by Dr. Sederson. And the reason I like it is because she was able to drill down on the 3 areas that really lead to disparities. And you can really extrapolate this to your practices. She categorized the disparities in 3 areas: structure, process, outcome. Structure. Oh, thank you. Y'all gonna tell me y'all understand my okay, structure. So, structure, process, outcome. Structure, process, outcome. So structure. Are you working in a hospital that primarily serves? Is it a public hospital that primarily serves Medicare patients, Medicaid patients? Or are you in a private hospital? Are you in a civilian setting? We know that resources vary in different areas. Are you in a more rural area or are you in a suburban area? Are you affiliated with a children's hospital or are you not affiliated with a children's hospital? We know that the structure of the system directly impacts the way disparities happen. Process. What is the process in your practice for the way standard modalities are rolled out? How do you do the breastfeeding teaching? How do you introduce lactation support in your hospital? Who gets to meet the social worker and who doesn't get to meet the social worker? Do you have coverage on the weekends? Do you have coverage at night? Do you have a language service on the weekend? Do you have a language service at night? So all of those things impact disparities. And then of course, outcomes. Do you have increased rates of IVH? Do you have increased rates of NET? We know that children that come from segregated zip codes are predisposed to have worse outcomes before they ever come to us. So the several key findings from her paper were neonatality mortality rates were higher, in which very low birth weight infants were Black, that Black and Hispanic infants breastfed at lower rates, that Black mothers reported receiving less breastfeeding support, and a lot of that was related to when lactation was available. Minority breastfeeding rates alone came up just if a minority mother was in a hospital that had more white mothers, just from being in that environment. Hospitals with large numbers of Black patients have more nursing understaffing. Referrals for ECI are less for Black and Hispanic patients, and that Black infants had a 2-fold greater risk of dying from IVH than other infants. Hispanic infants had a higher rate of dying from NET. The other thing she looked at is disparities, and she actually asked the staff. So this was objective data: structure, process, outcome. She asked medical providers, she asked the physicians, she asked the practitioners, she asked the nurses, and then she asked the patients. Do you think we have bias in our care? Do you think we deliver different care to different patients? What is your observation? And she was able to identify 4 categories: neglectful care, judgmental care, and systemic barriers. And so neglectful care, parents actually sitting feeling like a parent next to them was getting more attention than they were getting. Judgmental care, the biases we have about parents who can visit all day versus parents who can only come at night or on the weekend. Do you know it's a privilege to be able to come to the NICU and sit there all day for 6 months until your baby is discharged? Most people can't do that. Doesn't mean that they don't care as much about their child, but we have different relationships with those families who are there all the time because we know them more. We don't know the families that just come at night on the weekend as much. And then systemic barriers, visitation policy, language policy. During COVID, one of my hospitals actually enacted a policy where they just decided, because the rules kept changing every day, no visitors after 5, because they were having a hard time keeping track of who members could be at the bedside. If you cannot see your child after 5, what does that mean for people who work? What does that mean for people who have other kids? So we actually went 3 months where some families were only able to see their children on the weekends because we had a policy that you can only visit before 5. So we mentioned about IVH, the brain bleed being higher in premature babies. And we know that for segregated neighborhoods, those babies have a higher risk of brain bleed. And we know that segregated neighborhoods have a higher proportion of BIPOC populations. And we know that if you tell us your zip code today, we can tell you what those outcomes are going to be for preterm birth and poor outcomes. That's the definition of a disparity. I should not be able to tell by your zip code what your lifespan is going to be and what your poor outcomes are going to be. This was the landmark paper they introduced that linked zip code to increase rates of IVH before any resuscitative measures or anything were introduced. This was a paper that came out in August, just amplifying the voices of Black mothers. You guys probably saw this in your AAP, the AAP that came out in August, the pediatrics magazine. And what was nice about this was it included a visual abstract of patients actually talking about the ways they had experienced bias in the NICU. And it actually challenged us to think differently about the data, the quantitative data, the press gains, the surveys that are coming back. We need to capture the information that's not represented in there because our patients that are having adverse experiences are not mailing those press gains back. And then lastly, for disparities, I just want to briefly mention about breastfeeding disparities. We know that there's significant breastfeeding disparities for minority populations. We know that for all populations, it significantly drops off by 12 months of age. But the thing I really want to draw your attention to as we drill down on why we get disparities is that for Black infants, we're 2 times more likely to be premature. It's the leading cause of death for Black infants. We are more likely to die from SIDS, more likely to experience serious health conditions like asthma, diabetes, and obesity. And that we know that the suboptimal breastfeeding in Black infant has been attributed to over $3 billion in healthcare costs. But as we're talking to our families, I love that one of the panelists today talked about we need to listen more to our families. We need to listen to what the barriers are. So often when I'm talking to my staff about why someone has made the decision to choose to breastfeed or not choose to breastfeed, they are labeled as, I don't know why they don't understand. I don't know why they don't get that this is going to save their baby. I don't know why they don't understand that this is better. And so I would just have us roll back a little bit in American history and let you know that Black women started out in this country breastfeeding children that weren't even our own, often breastfeeding other children before we could feed our own. That legacy of wet nurse, that legacy of mammy is still very prevalent in a multi-generational family. When I had both of my kids, I had to fight my parents because I wanted to breastfeed. My dad's like, wow, you're a doctor, why are you doing that? Formula is better. Because there's still a mentality that formula is better. The other, yeah.
You're such a compelling speaker.
So wet nurses, mammies. And then the thing I want to draw your attention to, a lot of people don't know the history of this first set of Black quads in the United States who were used as part of the pet milk campaign. And before they were born, significant numbers of Black women and Black families were breastfeeding because they couldn't afford formula. Before everyone was breastfeeding. But then these false quads were used as part of this campaign. Their doctor, their OB, had the mother could not read. The mother signed over the rights for advertising in exchange to be in a house, to be in this campaign. They followed these babies all the way until their 20s. If you pull them up, you can see pictures with President Roosevelt and everybody. And you can see them on TV shows. And they used it in a campaign for pet milk. And when this campaign started happening, the message was sent to many minority families, oh, pet milk is better. I mean, it must be better because the quads don't want it. And you start to see a lot of images with them and a shift in minority communities. And the only pictures you saw of celebrating breastfeeding were white women. In order to see Black women breastfeeding at any time during that period, there was National Geographic pictures where they were presented in a more ethnic way, just for view as a spectacle, but not as something that someone would want to do. So this is embedded in our legacy. So sometimes people have heard you. People have heard you, but you have to think about the whole legacy and the context. So we talked a little bit about the trends in breastfeeding disparity. We talked a little bit about disparities. We talked a little bit about bias. We talked about bringing our whole identity, our whole self. We talked about how my slides weren't matching what I'm talking about, but it's okay. So what I want to kind of drill down on now as we move towards solutions is this whole issue of why is it that a Black woman with a college degree or more, even with access, insurance, knowledge, and resources, still has a higher risk for adverse outcomes in this country? And this model was first put out by Dr. Geronimo, this weathering model. And this weathering model describes the association of the chronic stress, the toll that it takes on the body and the immune system. So we know that some stress is good, but there's a difference between being stressed and stressed out. So we get a little stressed, our adrenaline goes up, we get to moving, but if you never get to take your foot off the pedal, if the allostatic load never gets lower, that actually causes your chromosomes to age faster, it shortens your lifespan, and you have increased risk of chronic disease like heart disease, like lung disease, like cancer. And we know that some populations experience more weathering than other populations. So that is the original book that was done by Dr. Geronimo. And I have on here, everybody here knows, well, hopefully, I actually have to refresh my own memory stuff. Telomeres, yeah, I remember telomeres, I don't know what my pediatric geneticists are. But the ends of those the ends of our chromosomes, the telomeres actually get shorter with chronic stress. You can see the baby has a nice size telomere, and you see the child, the adult, you see the older man has almost none. And so we know that chronic stress increases our aging and our telomeres actually get shorter. And we have in Dr. Geronimo's hypothesis, the life course hypothesis, she was able to put forth that we have these toxic influences from the community that impact the family, that impact the fetus. So the lived experience, just the lived experience of chronic stress taking its toll for adverse outcomes. So the key findings from her paper were: one, you have a 25% risk of increased death when you have shorter telomeres. The thing that really stood out to me when I was putting together this talk is that women, Black women compared to white women, ages 49 to 55, I'll be 55 tomorrow, I know I don't look like it, but 49 to 55, their telomeres are actually 7 years older. So I'm gonna be 55 tomorrow, but my telomeres think they're 62. That's not happening. And so when I am navigating stress, when I'm trying to navigate this world, I say to myself, girl, is this worth your telomeres getting shorter? Just walk away from that. Those telomere lives matter. So when your patients are in front of you, you need to be talking to your patients about their telomeres. I mean, because chronic stress is a significant predictor of early death. And we have lots of evidence for toxic stress in marginalized communities. And I just kind of set that on there. So this, I said we have lots of evidence. So I'm just showing you some additional statistics and findings about toxic stress. Police killings get under the skin, seeing that over and over, and just the impact of carrying that mental picture and carrying that anxiety and then constantly ramped up adrenaline. We know that in a study that looked at over 800 Black families for 25 years, that if marginalized families reported experiencing discrimination from the ages of 10 to 15, just their perception, they had a higher rate of depression in their 20s. There have been many, many studies since then just looking at the impact of chronic stress, linking it to early death and disease. The other thing I want to point out is it's not just the impression of stress and seeing stuff on TV. It's the things you hear even when you are trying to protect your peace. I mentioned I'm from the great state of Louisiana, and one of our senators, Bill Cassidy, recently said the rate at which women die during pregnancy shortly after Shortly after is not that bad if you subtract Black women. Now, he said that 2 months ago, y'all. He said it 2 months ago. All my friends were like, oh my gosh, Louisiana is the worst. And I was like, man, it's not just Louisiana. I mean, people were not as upset as you would think, and he said this out loud. So it's one thing I have chronic stress. I think I'm experiencing bias. It's another thing when somebody with a platform literally says, it's not that bad, you know, as long as you don't count Black women, it's okay. So we're not talking about slavery days, we're talking about September 2022. So how do disparities begin? So we've talked a little bit about, okay, we have disparities, we can't just blame it on DNA. We talked about toxic stress and the lived experience. This is going to be the busiest slide you see, but it's my favorite slide to talk about disparities. And I promise you, if you don't remember anything else from this talk but this slide, when you are in front of your patients, trying to figure out how to advance equity, particularly for your families of color, if you can remember the 5 ways to get disparities, you will be able to empower your families. As you're developing your strategies, if you remember this, you'll be able to empower your families. So most of the time, if I ask how do disparities happen, people will say access. If people have access, they will have less disparities. And access certainly is one reason why disparities happen. I want to talk about some of the other reasons. So if you look at this, it's called the Cliff of Good Health, that also was developed by Dr. Kamala Jones. And it was a way for her to show the system of advantage and disadvantage. So imagine, if you would, 2 populations standing. There's an orange population, they're a little further away from the cliff. There's a green population, they're a little closer to the edge. I'm not an outdoor person, I like being hot and sweating, but I do know that being close to the edge is not good. So if you look at the orange population, the goal is to be as far away from the cliff as possible. Those who have chronic stress, who never get a break, constantly live on the edge, and when they have a health crisis, they often have to get their health crisis in a tertiary, health crisis treated in a tertiary center like the emergency room. So the first way that disparities happen, if you look behind the orange people, it says differences in equity. So we've talked about that, SES status. Obviously, if you have a different SES status, you have opportunity to live in a certain area, live by a certain school, you get to choose kind of what neighborhood you want to be in. Your social equity allows you to be able to make those choices. Differences in exposures and opportunities. Where you live determines what exposures and opportunities you have to make decisions for your family as you navigate life. Differences in underlying health status. The example I like to use for underlying health status is Flint, Michigan. They had a policy that allowed those families to have land in their water. They asked somebody to sign paperwork that said that was okay. Nobody in that family or that neighborhood said, yeah, I think I want to live over here. The land in the water, yeah, that's for us. No. But if you are constantly exposed to that, you have a difference in your health status. You're going to have a higher risk of asthma, developmental issues, cardiovascular. You're going to have a difference in your health status. And the more negative impact you have, the closer you're going to be toward the cliff of, off the edge of the cliff of good health. So we've talked about differences in equity. We talked about exposures and opportunity. For example, we tell families you need to eat better. You need to go walk. You need to eat fresh fruits and vegetables. Do you know the neighborhood where your family lives in? Do they have access to fresh fruits and vegetables? Is it even safe to go outside and walk? I do an intervention with college students where they actually have to go to the neighborhood where their families live. Look at the bus stop. Look where the fresh fruits and vegetables. Do they have a Whole Foods around? And even if they have one, can they afford to buy anything there? It's your whole paycheck. I've been once. I want to go again. It's $300, 5 things in your bag. Some neighborhoods only have pawn shop, fast food, and liquor stores. So instead of just telling somebody to eat healthier, tell them how to eat healthy where they are. One of the interventions we were able to do was to get community churches to do a farmers market 1 week a month. So in their neighborhood, and we even had a 7-Eleven be converted to a farmers market. We have to think differently when we're advising how to live more healthy. Actually living near public transportation, living near a playground, actually is a better predictor of your health than access to insurance. How many of our marginalized communities have a safe playground or green spaces to go outside? The fourth reason for disparity, differences in access. I mentioned everybody kind of says that, but where I live and breathe is differences in quality of care. And so if you don't take anything else from this picture, what I want you to take is, it does not matter if you have access, SES status, better resources, can afford to eat at Whole Foods. If you are in front of somebody who decides by looking at you, the value they assign to you, that you don't deserve the same standard of care. It does not matter, none of that matters if when somebody's looking at me, they decide they can't treat me like their mom, their sister, their wife, their grandmother, their partner, their dad, their brother, their grandchild. If they don't see me in there, I'm not gonna have a good outcome. So we're talking about the things that will be further on the cliff of good health or way. Those are called the social determinants of health. And the main thing I want you to see on this graph is that the majority of our health outcomes are related to socioeconomic factors, what we just talked about, zip code, access to playgrounds, transportation, and health behaviors. It is not DNA, it is not genes, it's not biology. And so we talked a lot about segregation being a big predictor of poor outcomes, and why zip code is such a big predictor. And it's because even today, in 2022, the United States is still very segregated. That's by design, that's by policy. The red laws were on the books for a very long time, and I'm sure everybody in this room understands that there was a time when the realtors, when they would go out, they would show prospective customers certain areas where they could live, and other customers could live in other areas. And the red areas were where our BIPOC marginalized communities could live. That was the only choice that they had to live. And so even though that was a long time ago, we know that even today, those same things are still happening. I have an example here just from Cleveland. You can see the difference in lifespan just by your zip code. 73 years for the 95219, and then 926 57, 88 years. On the bottom, I have Louisiana. That's my home state. You see freshwater. If you live in freshwater, your average lifespan is 55. And this is further out is 75. So this is a huge systemic issue. And I do a workshop where I actually have everybody go in and put their zip code in just to get an idea of what the average lifespan is. So I'm constantly reminded of this. My mother is the oldest living person on the matriarchal side of my family. She's only 73. Everybody else is gone. Live in a very rural part of Louisiana. These systemic barriers are still impacting our outcomes today. So we talked about the link between stress, we talked about chronic stress, we've talked about these issues are still here. The best way for me to explain why these issues still impact us today is Mary Jones Gardner's tale. I don't know how many of you guys have seen it, but often when I'm talking about disparities, or even when George Floyd died, people were like, I don't get it, it's 2022. We have President Obama, I don't get it. Like, did everything get better? Like, no, get better. We're still navigating these issues. And so Tamara Jones has an allegory called the Gardener's Tale. I just have to share with you guys before we move on to some strategies. So imagine, if you will, that Gardner has retired from her dream job. She buys a house in the mountains. She goes into the home, and it has two big windows. There are window boxes there. And she's so excited because she always wants to retire in a house with window boxes. One of the window boxes has some old soil in it. The other window box has no soil at all. She thought, I gotta go to Home Depot, get some soil, I'm gonna get some seeds. Her favorite flowers in the whole wide world are red flowers. But she gets some pink flowers too. She doesn't really like pink flowers, but she just gets some for some variety. She comes back home and she puts the red seeds in the box with it had no soil, and puts the fresh soil in those. And she takes the pink seeds and puts it in the box with the old soil. She waters them every day. There's sunlight. She talks to the plants every day. She's so excited when the red flowers start growing. The red flowers start growing, they burst through the soil, they're like, great. The pink flowers are having a harder time. It's hard soil, it's rocky soil. Most of them never even reach the surface, but a few do. The strongest actually reach the surface. Now it's time for the second generation. The second generation, It's fantastic. Every now and then, a red petal lands in the box with the pink flowers. And the gardener comes in and says, wait, what's going on here? The red flowers are supposed to be here. The pink flowers are supposed to be here. They are not supposed to be together. Pluck them out. Now it's time for the third generation. The third generation, the legacy from the red flowers, is really thriving. The pink flowers, it's not as many as the red flowers, but they're strong, they're durable. They have endured, and they are trying to reach their way to their maximum potential as well. A bumblebee comes by to pollinate the pink flowers. And the pink flowers are looking at the red flowers. And the pink flowers say, red is better than pink. Please don't pollinate us with pink. We want to be pollinated with red. The red is thriving, the red is better. The red looks better, the red fits in. The red has less problems. I want to be red. Kamara Jones uses this allegory to show the three levels of racism, which I'm going to show you on the next slide. At the very end, the gardener comes in and says, wow, I told you red was better. Look, the red is thriving. They both had the same thing. They both had water. They both had soil. They both had sunlight. I talk to both every day. I don't understand why the pink flowers didn't thrive, because they both had the same thing and they both should be thriving. I knew that red was better. So she uses that to show institutional racism. Institutional racism is somebody has decided boxes, for example, black and white. Somebody has decided boxes or barriers in your system that keep people separate. So what are the boxes in your system? The internalized racism is if you live in a system long enough where you're constantly told you're not good enough, where you're constantly told you don't fit in, if you're constantly told your look isn't the right look, you start to believe that. You start to believe that. Personally mediated racism is when you look for the narrative that supports your bias, which is what the gardener did. So I asked you, in your systems, are you being a good gardener? Do you have old soil? Do you need to get some fresh soil? Are you trying to expect to get the same results for all your populations, for all your families, when you need to do something different? And if you go online, there's a YouTube of Kamara Jones acting out the gardener's tale. So what we're getting at as we look at strategies is the problem of race-based medicine in the United States. As I pointed out, these issues are not new. The first comprehensive look at this is unequal treatment. It came out in 2002 by the Institute of Medicine. And it had three key findings. One, Black patients are more likely to be blamed for their circumstances. We've given you everything, you should be taking care of yourself. You need to eat better, you need to exercise, you need to listen to what we're trying to tell you, because we're trying to get you to be healthy. Take care of yourself and be healthy, but because you're not following our instructions, you find that you have these worse outcomes. We know that more than 1/3 of healthcare quality measures, Hispanic patients receive worse care than white patients. And we also know for Black, American Indian, and Alaska Native that they have 40% worse quality measures on healthcare indicators than white patients. We know that race-based medicine is a problem in the United States, and we're finally starting to challenge the actual measures we use to apply to patients. Skin thickness. Just 8 years ago, medical students were interviewed about skin thickness. They gave them case vignettes, and medical students still believe that Black patients have thicker skin, so they tolerate pain better. So they made recommendations that were different for pain medication than they were recommended for white patients. We know that the recommendations for dialysis were based on flawed measurements for GFR for Black patients versus white patients, so they get referred to treatment later. We know that asthma, well, you may not know, but for your pulmonary function test for asthma, those original measurements were taken by the doctor that Thomas Jefferson appointed for slaves on a slave ship, and he decided that Black patients had a poor lung function, poor lung capacity, smaller lung capacity. I mean, on a slave ship, and he wasn't a doctor. He was a 20-year-old that they dispatched to be the doctor for the slaves on the ship. We're still using those measurements. Pulse oxes. Pulse oxes. We learned during COVID, pulse oxes aren't as accurate in patients that have more melanin. That information was already existed, but we're still using those measures. For Black and Hispanic women, for C-section after vaginal birth, we know that the measurements that precipitate being pushed toward a C-section are based on flawed race-based medicine. with respect to pelvic size. And we know that sickle cell patients do not receive pain medicine at the same rate as other patients for, even if you have an algorithm for when they should receive pain medicine. They're seen as pain seeking and the skin is thicker, so you don't need as much medicine. So we all know this, but I think it's very wonderful that the New England Journal of Medicine came out with this graphic, just really challenging us to question the denominators and the measures we use. Who was part of that denominator? How did this measure come to be? Why am I making these recommendations? Challenging that race is a social construct. It's a social construct. And that when we use race-based medicine, we have stereotypes that lead to adverse outcomes. So just in summary, before we move to strategies, Black people don't just face death at the barrel of a policeman's gun or within our medical system. Life is taken away on a daily basis through housing discrimination, through the ability to get or maintain a job that allows us to pay rent, have health insurance, buy food, and through undercompensation. Chronic stress, the lived experience of navigating these challenges. And we know for Black women with multiple degrees, they have navigated many challenges daily, on a daily basis. This last graph just was a study looking at provider bias and why providers make different decisions. And they were able to narrow down to these categories: importance of race. Again, what you've been taught about race. Our medical textbooks have race-based medicine and race as a risk factor for disease. Patient level issues, system issues, we already talked about, bias, we talked about, patient values and communication. So what about some solution strategies and a summary? So I hope what you're getting from this talk is that this issue of maternal mortality and infant mortality for Black women, Black families, Black infants is not an individual issue. It's a systemic issue. And we cannot expect to solve an individual issue. We cannot expect to solve a systemic problem with an individual solution. We need systemic solutions to systemic problems. And what I want to say to everybody here is a very committed, equity-focused healthcare provider, a very committed, equity-focused healthcare provider cannot overturn a system that is biased. We cannot do it right. If we have to change systems, we have to change policies. We have to look at, wait, are we being good gardeners here? So one person trying to change it is not going to make a difference if your whole system is doing something different. An example I like to use for that is Kaiser. Kaiser was able to show that their algorithm that was enrolling patients in the ER, Black patients that came in sicker, even if they came in before a white patient that was healthier, will automatically roll to lower on the waiting list so that the white patient could be seen sooner. Because the algorithm deduced this patient is sicker, if they have a bad outcome, it's going to make the hospital not look as good, so let's see this person before. They actually came out with a statement. So it's not always the person. People are thinking it's the person at the bedside. It's the way. Sometimes it is the person at the bedside, but a lot of times it's not. The people who are in it, who were enrolling the people in that ER, had no idea that the algorithm was actually flawed that way. So what are we talking about? We're talking about equality versus equity. Equality versus equity. So equality, remember, the Guardian was saying, well, I'm doing the same thing, they should have had the same results. Equity means that everybody has the same opportunity for the same good outcome, same opportunity. And different populations need different things to have the same opportunity for the same good outcome. So I would look at it as under-resourced community and populations and better resource communities and populations, and how can we change that? So for national policies, one of the things that happened after George Floyd died was several organizations took a national stance to really start drilling down on systemic barriers, naming bias, naming racism, including our organization, the AAP. And they had 5 areas they looked at: internal processes. Remember I talked about process, structure, outcome, education, leadership, clinical practices, and advocacy. And I am blown away by all the advocacy that is happening in Ohio. I mean, I thought Texas is great. But you guys are doing great. Okay. So the things I'm going to talk about directly with respect to your practice. The AAP has drilled down on leadership, teaching DEI, teaching us about implicit bias, increasing the pipeline. When you look at your workforce, if I come into your office, will I see someone who looks like me? We know that there's data for racial concordance. Sometimes that's needed. If I look at the magazines, if I look at the pictures on the wall, do I feel safe? Do I feel seen? Will I feel supported? And if not, what can I do so that that can happen? How can we increase the pipeline? How can we increase the diversity in the workforce? It's going to be more than just a DEI course. We know that if we take a DEI module and check it, okay, I did it, 40 years racism gone. No, we need to make sure we have accountability. So evaluate your practice enrollment intake triage process for bias, all the way from scheduling down to lactation support to the way you triage your nighttime calls, the way you intake new patients. What's the lag time to get new patients in? DEI with accountability. Do you have screening for social determinants of health? There are a lot of computer algorithms now in IT with screening for social determinants of health now. Increase the partnership with your community partners who already have trust with the community that you're trying to serve. So many times we have amazing interventions and we put it out there like, hey, community, I have this for you. Come in and use it. Community's like, yes, give for that. No, who are you? And so you need to have your community-based organizations partner along with you to kind of be a bridge and alliance, because marginalized populations have many, many reasons to not trust our healthcare system. It's not like it hasn't come honestly, this mistrust. Some novel evidence approaches that many community-based organizations have pioneered are sister circles where you actually get a mentor from your practice, appearing in your practice, like vaccine hesitancy, lactation support, recognizing the signs of postpartum depression, and they are a mentor or a big sister or a community mother for your patients. Validating mental health needs. I want to really emphasize this for Black women because we have this concept that Black women are strong, invincible. Black women are human. They're human. And it's hard to walk around with a mask all the time, being Black girl magic all the time, when you're actually crying underneath. And so when people say, well, we have resources, they're not using them, they don't need them. No, they do need them. They don't trust it enough to be vulnerable. So we can't be superwoman all the time. We need community partners, like our faith-based organizations, in places where they already have trust. We're fortunate to have a administration that is supporting this initiative for Black maternal mortality, and we know that we still have a lot of work to do on the process. So the last thing I want to say is on a personal note to everyone here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for allowing me to bring my full self. Normally, when I'm talking about disparities, I almost always get a question about how long it was. And I just want to leave you with this as a part of my intersectionality. On this slide is my great-great-great-grandfather. He's a slave, Reverend Harrison Barber. I cannot trace him further than Mississippi. But when he got emancipated, he came to Louisiana and he started Greater Philadelphia Baptist Church. That's that cornerstone in the middle. It's the church I grew up in, got married in, got baptized in. And then this little brown girl came from him and graduated from UCLA. But what I really want you to focus on is that big sign on the end. It says Larry Kemp Charity Hospital 24 hours, OB colored 8 a.m. to 11, gyne colored 1 p.m. to 4, Tuesdays medicine white 8 a.m. to 12, pediatrics 1 to 3, and so forth. If you look all the way toward the end, on Saturdays, colored and white can be seen together. Why do I have that sign up there? I was born at Larry Kemp Charity Hospital. I was born in 1967. Segregation was over, quote unquote. I saw this sign at the Smithsonian Black History Museum in DC. I called my mom, I was like, Mom, they have a sign here from Larry Kemp Charity Hospital. I always wondered, why was I born in Independence? My parents were in Baton Rouge. Independence was an hour away. And my mom said, Terry, that's the only place that colors could deliver. My parents drove an hour so that I could be born in a segregated hospital. rather than deliver at home. So it is not that long ago to me. I'll be 55 tomorrow. So it's part of my lived experience. And so I am so excited to be in an audience where people get that it's part of the lived experience, that people understand the disparities or differences that should not be, and people who are going to upstand and make sure that all of our families feel supported, seen, and get equitable care. So everyone has bias. Biases leads to differences in quality of care. Adverse health outcomes we know are related to systemic issues. Chronic stress leads to adverse outcomes. Systemic issues lead to systemic solutions. Social determinants of health are a bigger predictor than the color of my skin. And zip code is the biggest predictor of adverse health outcomes today in the United States. I have some references on the slides, and that's my direct email if we don't get to questions. And if you are social media savvy and there's something that you like, you go ahead and tag me. If you didn't like it, please don't tag me.